Hey guys, in this video I wanted to do a revamp here of my Electoral College map matchup between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, which actually could very well be the 2020 matchup that we see if Joe Biden decides to run for that Democratic nomination, given the fact that he right now is ahead pretty consistently in the polling data that we've been seeing. It's been well over half a year since the last Biden-Trump Electoral College map video I put together. Perhaps in that one I was a little bit more generous to Joe Biden, although I think that potentially could be a pretty strong matchup for the Democrats. Be interesting to see how it would play out, but there's no denying that Joe Biden has way better favorability in comparison to Trump. And Biden, he's typically about 15 to 20 points higher in terms of his favorability in comparison to Hillary Clinton, who was the last Democratic candidate, obviously, that Donald Trump went against in running for president. Donald Trump, his favorability actually are just slightly higher than they were back right before the 2016 election, but still pretty low, typically in the lower 40% range, while Biden is usually in the mid to upper 50s range in terms of that favorability, which I think gives him a much better chance at going on and winning this matchup against Donald Trump. But then again, you also have to factor in that Trump is the incumbent this time around, and it's never easy to beat an incumbent, even if the numbers say that it's possible. We saw this back in 2004, where George Bush didn't necessarily have the most overwhelming positive numbers by any means, but he was able to take down John Kerry. And then also the same with Barack Obama in 2012, didn't have overwhelmingly positive approval numbers, but still was able to pretty handily defeat Mitt Romney in that re-election bid. So as you can see, it's never easy to beat an incumbent, and I think maybe in the last Biden versus Trump matchup video, I didn't give Trump quite enough of that incumbency advantage baked into some of those results. So to start off this video, I want to give Biden his safe states, give Trump his safe states after that, and then talk about some of the more competitive results to finish things out. So starting off with Joe Biden, giving him the states of Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, New Mexico, and then going into the Midwest, Illinois, pretty much a lock there for Biden, especially with Obama, his ties to the city of Chicago, and how he'd be able to really give Biden a boost, who was his vice president for 8 years. You can pretty much lock that one down, especially with it being the most left-leaning Midwest state. And then the other results up here in the Northeast, pretty much across the board, minus New Hampshire and Maine's 2nd Congressional District, are going to be in Democratic hands in presidential elections. Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, the District of Columbia, and then also the state of New York and the state of Vermont. And that puts us up to 190 electoral votes. And the Republicans, not quite as many in terms of that locked-in category, about around 125. So those are going to be with the states of Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska minus the 2nd Congressional District. And then Kansas is actually an interesting one, because of these Great Plains states, Kansas doesn't have quite the appetite for the Republican Party, given how unpopular former Governor Brownback was, and then also their recent governor's election. The Democrats were able to win that statewide there in 2018. So things are starting to look a little bit better for the Democratic Party in the state of Kansas. But still, at this point, we would give the lean to Donald Trump over Joe Biden, especially until I saw some polling data in that state. And there's actually a lot of states where I'd love to see a hypothetical matchup between Biden and Trump and how they'd play out. And I'll point out those specific states that I'd love to see numbers for. Now, moving on here, we have Oklahoma, Missouri. And Missouri's really been becoming more of a consistently strong Republican state than maybe where we saw it a decade or so ago. And then moving on beyond that, we have Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky. It's another one of those states where I'd really love to see some polling between Trump and Biden, and then Indiana on top of that, which is also considered a pretty safe Republican state there in the Midwest, and then moving over to West Virginia and down to South Carolina, and then the state that I almost always forget about to give to the Republicans here, that being the state of Alaska and its 3 electoral votes. So now I want to talk about the last 223 electoral votes on the map and where I'd see them going between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Now, Texas is becoming a bit more of an interesting case. We saw Beto O'Rourke drum up a lot of enthusiasm there. He nearly took down incumbent Senator Ted Cruz in his 2018 Senate bid. And this is another one of these southwestern states where demographics are becoming a lot better for the Democratic Party. And we have to remember, Hillary Clinton only lost to Donald Trump in Texas. I think it was by about 8 or 9 percentage points. I think Biden could make things a lot more interesting than Clinton was able to do, in particular in the state of Texas. But still, at the end of the day, giving it to Donald Trump and a lean there against Joe Biden. And then another interesting, usually pretty consistently Republican state, obviously, here in the South, that being the state of Georgia. But also another one of these states that's been getting a bit more interesting. Democrats, we saw this with Stacey Abrams nearly able to upset Brian Kemp in that governor's bid in 2018, and then also Hillary Clinton only losing to Trump by about 5 percentage points. The difference in favorability between Biden and Clinton, I think, could have a big effect here, and it could go right down to the wire, but still, at the end of the day, going to be giving it to a lean over to the Republicans and Donald Trump, and I'd love to see some polling data in that state specifically. And then moving down to Florida, I think it's a positive sign for Donald Trump that his candidate, Ron DeSantis, was able to go on and win the governorship away from Gillum, who was the Democratic challenger. I think that plays well for Trump. Biden, in particular, I think he could possibly come in here and sweep the state of Florida back into Democratic hands. Biden has really strong approval amongst older voters, and that's obviously an important demographic to do well in the state of Florida with. But still, again, the 2018 results, you have to be putting this in a Republican lean, at least at this point in time. They were also able to pick up that Senate seat with Rick Scott taking down Bill Nelson. So things are looking pretty good for the Republicans right now. It is important to note, though, that back in 2012 and 2008, Obama was able to win the state of Florida, and that was with Biden running as his vice president. But it takes a really special, charismatic kind of Democratic candidate to campaign and have success and turn out the vote in Florida. I'm not necessarily convinced that Biden is that particular candidate. Now, moving up to what should also be another very interesting competitive result, and that being in the state of North Carolina. Clinton only lost by about 3.5 percentage points to Donald Trump. North Carolina, their most recent governor's election, it just barely went to the Democrats. This is, you could say, a purple state, but probably still just a slight lean to the Republicans overall. This is another one of those states where I'd love to see some polling data between Biden and Trump. Still going to be giving it to Trump, the incumbent. He was able to prove to us that he won it in 2016. Perhaps he can do that again here in 2020, but I would not be surprised to see Joe Biden take the state of North Carolina or Florida for that instance. Now, moving up to Virginia, which has been leaning more towards the Democrats over the past decade. They've been making a lot of gains, specifically in suburban areas in the state. Clinton was able to win the state against Donald Trump by about 5 or so percentage points. She was also boosted by having Tim Kaine as her vice president, that being the senator of Virginia. But I think that it's relatively safe to say that Joe Biden would be able to pick up Virginia in a matchup against Donald Trump. And then also New Hampshire, Clinton was barely able to pick that one up against Trump. I think Biden does a bit better, in particular with these types of voters up in the Northeast in the state of New Hampshire, and probably keeps that one in Democrats' hands. The second congressional district, Trump was able to actually do quite well there and won it against Clinton, obviously, back in 2016. This congressional district just went over to the Democrats. They took it away from an incumbent Republican in the 2018 election. But in this one, I'm still going to be giving it as a slight lean over to Donald Trump. Now I want to move out to the West, Nevada. The Democrats have made a lot of gains here in recent years. They just picked up that Senate seat, taking down an incumbent Republican, Dean Heller, with Democratic challenger Jackie Rosen. Clinton held on to Nevada, taking down Donald Trump there in 2016. I think it's pretty straightforward that Biden would be able to win Nevada. In kind of a similar case over in Colorado, there's an interesting, or at least there's going to be an interesting 2020 Senate race there where the Democrats have a tremendous possibility of picking up that Senate seat away from the current Republican Senator Gardner. This is one of these states out west where the Democrats have made a lot of gains over the past decade, and I think Biden continues to carry that. Now, Arizona is a very interesting place here. The Democrats just picked it up in 2018 with Kyrsten Sinema taking that Senate seat into Democratic hands. Of course, the Republicans weren't running an incumbent, Jeff Flake bowing out of that one. They had McSally running, but still it was very close. The demographics are getting better for the Democrats year in and year out. So going into 2020, I actually think that they have a pretty good shot at picking up another southwestern state. And I think Biden would be able to do that. Now, Clinton lost to Trump by about 3.5 percentage points. I think the difference in favorability and then also the increase in demographics that are favorable to the Democrats are enough to flip the state of Arizona over to the Democratic side. Now, moving into the all-important Midwest, that 2nd congressional district in Nebraska, I think Biden would have a decent shot at picking up. But Trump was able to grab it in 2016, and I'd like to see some polling data on it before flipping it over to Biden. And now we really get into the meat of this result and who's going to go on to win this election. Right now we have 233 for Joe Biden, 225 for Donald Trump. I'll start off with what I think is still a relatively safe bet, and that would be Minnesota going to Joe Biden. Clinton was just able to win it by about 1 or so percentage points, and it is one of the more left-leaning Midwestern states. Really the only other Midwestern state that I'd say is a bit more to the left than Minnesota would be the state of Illinois. And then Ohio, Trump did very well here. He won it by about 8 or so percentage points after Obama had won it in 2012 and 2008. I think Biden makes things a lot more interesting here, but there are a lot of people that love Donald Trump here in the state of Ohio. I think he's just able to keep it and make it so that Biden wouldn't be able to make up the difference to go on and pick up the state of Ohio overall. Also, in terms of the 2018 midterms, Ohio, that governor's race, statewide election did really well in terms of keeping that in the governorships in Republican hands, while in the Senate, Sherrod Brown, a more progressive Democrat, a bit more progressive, I'd say, than Joe Biden, had a lot of success there as well. I'm not necessarily sure that Joe Biden is the kind of Democrat that can have overwhelming success in the state of Ohio, and even in some of these other Midwestern states, because Biden, throughout his career, has supported these free trade deals that have really devastated the manufacturing throughout the Midwest. And I think Trump would be able to effectively attack Joe Biden, kind of like he did with Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And even with those devastating attacks, Clinton was still almost able to pick up Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, losing each of those by less than 1 percentage point. But before getting in to that trifecta there, I want to talk about the state of Iowa, where Trump actually did pretty well against Clinton, winning by around 10 percentage points. This was a big flip compared to what we had seen in the prior 2 cycles, where Obama had actually done pretty well for Democrats in Iowa, picking it up in 2012 as well as 2008. And we saw the Republicans lose a lot of ground here. 3 of their 4 congressional districts going in Democratic hands. Actually, it was almost a clean sweep. They came up just short in the Northwestern district there, with Stephen King just able to hold on to it. But again, a positive sign there. And I think the tariffs, particularly hurting the farmers in the state of Iowa, aren't a great sign for the Republicans here for their chances potentially in 2020. I actually think Biden would be able to pick up the state of Iowa and bring it back to the Democrats. So that puts us at 249 to 243, and it pretty much just comes down to the 3 states at this point in terms of what decided the 2016 election. And again, the fact that Hillary Clinton had such low favorability numbers in contrast to Joe Biden, like I said, who's about 15 to 20 points higher, I think that makes enough of a difference, and perhaps he can get a bit more enthusiasm for his candidacy than what Clinton was able to drum up here in these important Rust Belt states. And at least personally, I think Joe Biden is able to just pick up these 3 results with Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I think he's probably more likely to pick up Michigan and Pennsylvania than possibly Wisconsin. So if we did give Wisconsin back over to Donald Trump, it would still be a situation where the Democrats would be able to go on and take the presidency. But also in Wisconsin in 2018, Tammy Baldwin, that statewide Senate race, she did very well, winning by double digits. And then also the governorship going to Tony Evers and his challenge against incumbent Scott Walker. So that's also some pretty positive signs for the Democrats there. And I think that Biden would be able to take it in a situation against Donald Trump. So I think this is potentially how I could see the map playing out between Biden and Trump. States where I could possibly see Biden also picking up, perhaps Ohio, North Carolina, Florida, maybe even Georgia. But then in terms of Donald Trump, he would still clearly have a chance of picking up states like Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona. And I think it would be a fascinating situation if these two candidates went against each other. I think it could possibly be competitive, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Biden was able to win in convincing fashion. It just kind of depends on how the whole landscape and campaigning process played out in that scenario. So that's going to wrap up this video, guys. Thanks for stopping on in. Consider subscribing for more. I hope to see you back here for future videos.